let's talk about neurodiversity. Whoops, and I'll press the right buttons. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to chat for a little bit, talk with you guys a little bit about what neurodiversity is and why it's important, and then Nancy and I will talk, and hopefully we'll hear from some of you guys as well. So, what is it? Why is it important? It's a relatively new concept. The term, Judy Singer, she's a woman with autism, is most known for using the term neurodiversity. It came out in the mid-90s. Most commonly, what people will think of is autism spectrum, then probably ADHD, and then maybe learning differences or disabilities. But as you can see on my diagram here, there's a lot of things that can be included in neurodiversity. Neurological variations have always existed, right? We know this. But there's a couple of reasons that neurodiversity, I think, is a really important topic right now, especially. And one is that language is important. If you look at my circle here of neurodiversity examples, a lot of the things in these bubbles are what would fall into the category of a diagnosis. Not all of them, right? But a lot of these are going to be diagnoses. OCD, Tourette's, ADD, autism spectrum, dyslexia, right? And so a diagnosis also sometimes is felt or experienced as a label. We need these because they allow us as communities to talk together, to come together and create useful tools and systems to help people, right? We need them in our medical, our education, our social world. And because, again, language is important, the term neurodiversity is allowing us to have a platform for communication that we can move past the labels of diagnosis and also step outside of a lot of the things like shame that can come with a label for many people, or misunderstanding. So that's one of the reasons I think that it's important to kind of dive into neurodiversity, and we'll talk about that. And another one here is that also neurodiversity captures those who fall outside the kind of typical boundaries of a diagnosis, right? So sometimes we get kids that you might have a student that is often described as quirky, or you might be getting feedback of, they're doing so great, so kind, great with their friends, not turning in any of their homework, but we're not really meeting diagnostic criteria for something, so there, for a number of reasons, the term neurodiversity is a great space for us to continue to work together, again, medical, educational, and our society, to embrace our diverse range of minds and also have safe spaces to help one another and to provide services and access things. Okay, there we go. Okay, so one thing I'm going to put out to you guys. So let's say that you think you have a child who is neurodiverse, or you do. I want to talk a little bit about what this is like as a parent, parenting in the neurodiverse world. So in many ways, I'm actually not going to tell you guys what it's like. Those are some things I want you to think about that maybe we can come back to a little bit later. But I'll name a few things that I know from my personal experience and my professional experience, and things that I encourage you to be thinking about as you're looking for what comes next in terms of parenting and supporting our neurodiverse children. So I encourage people to think about, what does it feel like? What does it feel like if you're thinking of your neurodiverse child when you're parenting them? Where is it kind of like you expected or not like you expected? What you're hearing from your community about parenting are different. Where is it a joy like nothing you could have imagined? And where are you exhausted and at your wit's end? I think parents coming in, I often hear a lot of being exasperated and tired, and combined with a big smile when they start to describe something, just really unique and dynamic about their neurodiverse child. Another thing I encourage you guys to talk about with one another and then think about for yourself is, what are you seeing? What are you seeing behaviorally? But also, what are you just seeing That's why I have explicit and implicit. So what do we kind of see? Like, what do we see on the playground, in the store? And also, what are you just experiencing at home? What do you notice? What do you see in your own responses to your child, right? So we're kind of thinking about those neurological differences and what they bring out in us as parents, being aware of that side as well as we think about how we want to interact and support our kids. So again, I know I'm going through a lot quickly here at the start so that we can have some space also to discuss. Okay, so everybody likes to have a tips and tricks, like something you can take away. And if I could like put a magical sparkle across this, which I suppose some people can in PowerPoint, but I did not think to do, I would have the word, creative, kind of like flow across this. So again, if we go back here and we look at all the things in the circles around neurodiversity, obviously there's not like one tip and trick that's going to meet the needs of every student who would fall in this whole range. But these are things that I encourage you guys to kind of keep as umbrella labels in your toolbox. And then how it will be creatively applied for your family and your child. So always going to be a good place to start if we're struggling with something with a direction or an education piece, make it visual. That the more that we integrate our 5 senses, the better. So auditory is often, not always, if we're not in a hearing community, but often auditory is the way that we're communicating. So we tell our kids things. So if we can get eyes and ears, and then also if you number the third one on here, engage your child in problem solving is kind of going to just be woven into all of these. Right now we're engaging more of our senses, which helps the brain and helps with learning. Now make it visual. Some of you guys are like, what do you mean? You got to think about what works for your kid. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One, make it visual might be you and your kid get a big old piece of butcher paper and some markers and you sit down and it's blocked out with colors and you say, here's how we're approaching this routine or this homework problem or this thing. And we put it up in the kitchen and we reference it, right? Some of your guys' kiddos are going to love that. Others are going to be like, no, I hate that. That's the worst. And they'll tear it off the wall. Right. So another example, I was working with a student and we were kind of doing some behavior modification things. The specific thing we'd chosen to practice with was how to learn to keep your wet towel or put your wet towel back on the towel rack and not leave your wet towel on the bed or the floor. Mom's just like, I just don't want to have wet towels. Engaging this student or client in the problem solving. So when I said make it visual, this student had the idea of hanging something from their room. They made their own kind of sign and hung it. So it kind of bop them in the head every time they open their door, right? That was one step on that we kind of worked towards. We did eventually get the towel on the towel rack, right? Obviously getting bopped in the head every time they opened their door wasn't the best plan long-term, but that's a couple of examples of how make it visual doesn't just have to be maybe your interpretation of that, but as you engage your children in this, you're thinking of engaging them as many of the senses as you can. Another one that's just always going to be great to have in your pocket is when we're learning something hard or practicing or working through something, make it fun, and then be okay with stopping before the fun stops, especially when it comes around education. So, I know as a parent with my own kiddos, especially when, if we're working on an OT goal or something, and I just know she can do it, and I just want her to do it, and I can just ask her to try one more time, because I know she can do it, and I can just give her this correction, right? And really quick, I'm pulling all the fun out of it. And so I encourage parents, however this applies to you, obviously not everything is fun, but as creatively as we can to engage our students in a way that's making it fun, and then be okay with stopping right before the fun stops and coming back to it. Really is okay. We're going to get much more in the big picture, in the long picture, by being able to come back to it than, if we get sucked into those kind of battles, which we all do, and you can always just come back the next day. So again, engage your child in the problem solving. Routine is another one that I always want to throw out. And I encourage, again, make it right for your family. So some students are going to love a routine so much they become inflexible. That won't work for the whole family. Other students are like, no routine, that's the worst. Don't give me a schedule. I know for myself as a parent, I would love to wake up every day and just take each new day as it comes and not have a routine and a schedule, but that is not what my child needs. My child very much needs to know what is coming, the more that we talk about that. So some of our routines are fairly explicit, but often another kind of example of routine is that I have a routine of naming and telling social stories with things that are going to be different in the day. So if we have a doctor's appointment, or right now with COVID, things feel like they're different all of the time. And so as I know those things are coming. So again, I'm giving you guys examples that hopefully you can think about how you can fit this in with your family, your parenting, your child. And then the last and most important tip and trick I can ever give parents is, what do you need? Please, parents, take the time to think about what you need, especially right now with COVID. And there's a whole variety of obvious reasons why that's important, but a couple of the reasons is, if you take the time, with yourself, with a friend, with your partner, to be aware of what you need when you're feeling drained of your energy or exasperated, that's not only going to help you come back, but that really models for your child that it's okay and that you can come back. That's really important to building self-esteem and self-concept. We all get frustrated, right? We all get tired too. It doesn't always have to be frustration, but we all get tired. And as a parent, whether or not they see it, whether or not they're like, you might be like, mommy needs to take a break right now, or you just are doing this on your own. So it's just a vibe that's happening in your home. Your, effort and energy towards that self-care and just knowing what you need when you need to recharge really will model that for your kids, and goes so far in continuing to support their developing self-concept and self-confidence. All right. So the last kind of piece here that I want to talk about before we get to chatting a little bit is kind of, if you're thinking, okay, but what do I do? What now? I think my child is neurodiverse. So I need to explore a couple of things here that came up that would fall in a neurodiverse category. And so we want to seek a diagnosis or not, kind of depending on where you're at. So that's where I go back to this one. And if we say what now, I really ask parents to think about these questions. What are you seeing? What does it feel like? What are the explicit and the implicit things? Gather that for yourself, talk it through, write it down. And then use that to figure out what is your next step. So the question I ask is, what is the nature of your concern? If you're like, I think I need to get some support here. I need a next step to help my child. So what is the nature of your concern? And then use that to look at what's the right option to start from. These are kind of, these 4 spaces here are the right place for anybody, depending on who the person is, right? You will choose for yourself. An evaluation is a great place to start for those diagnoses that were like autism and ADHD, learning disabilities. So I encourage everybody, go to the school, ask the school for an evaluation. It's not what everybody's going to get, but put it in writing and ask for it. And if you want either a supplemental evaluation or an evaluation is something the school can provide for your student, then a private evaluation is a great way to go. Obviously at FPSK, we do neuropsych evaluations, so you can come see us, but also we are lucky enough to have a number of phenomenal practitioners in our area on the east side in the greater Seattle area. So there's a lot of great people out there who can help you walk through the evaluation. And there's a few different kinds of evaluations. So again, think about the nature of your concern. A pediatrician and or a psychiatrist is always a great place to start. If you're not sure, call up your pediatrician. And then back to that nature of concern, you can might start with a specialist. The OTs are also a great place to go. Like, you're not really going to go wrong with picking up the phone there. And then my favorite, and really I think the most experienced and informational place that you guys have, is the parent boards in your own parent community. Truly, you guys are each other's experts, resources, cheerleaders. If it's your first day and you're like, oh my gosh, I just had the thought yesterday and I saw this webinar and I'm here and I don't even know, there are a ton of other parents maybe on this webinar right now, and certainly in your community, who are somewhere along this journey. And many of them are far down the journey. They've learned a lot, trial by fire or error or experience, kind of depending on how it goes. And yes, this is my profession and I have wonderful colleagues, but honestly, you guys, I just cannot stress enough over and over how important it is to engage in that parent community. And right now online with COVID, there's actually a pretty bolstered online community. It was pretty strong anyways, but that is a benefit, if we want to use that word in relationship to COVID right now. But that is something that there's just a lot of access right now online to communities that are talking and places you can ask questions. So, all right. So there is my brief overview. And I am going to, actually, are there any slides we want to go back to, Nancy? Or do you think I should take them down?
I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet, so I think we're okay. But as you were sliding through them, I was remembering back to 10 years ago when my son was diagnosed and just thinking, like, gosh, I wish I had trusted my gut. Mm-hmm. It took so much longer than I had intended or that I wanted to, because I just wasn't quite sure. And after I got through the initial stages, I realized I should have just trusted my gut, but I just didn't know. I had these two neurodiverse kids who were very different from each other, and didn't know what normal was. So I really just needed to appreciate what my own brain was telling me about how different things were, and how going for that assessment just made the biggest difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of why I put this slide in here, because you probably know too from your experience that 10 years down the road, Nancy, but I know families coming in to see me, that's so true, where it's just a gut. The parent said, something, whatever it is, and so that's, I ask these questions, like, just you think about, what does it feel like? What is coming up for you? What are you seeing? Because moms and dads and parents, your kid. We don't always know what to do with them, but your kid. So yeah. Okay. I might back out of these slides then, and we'll chat a little bit.
Yes, I'm trying to find where the questions are. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would like to start counseling for my 12-year-old who is on the spectrum and has ADHD. We need help with emotional regulation. Suggestions on the type of counseling.
I don't know if I have suggestions on the type of counseling in terms of, like, should we do cognitive behavior counseling or should we do ABA? But I would say read people's websites and call and look for people who specifically have experience with ADHD and working with people on the spectrum. CBT and ABA are both great places, or great methodologies. But in my experience, finding a good fit is really the best counseling person, which I know is a little bit of a vague answer. But that legwork really is important, especially I know clients I've worked with both of those diagnoses, fit really matters. I mean, I have clients where it's like, we just, it's sometimes you got to build some rapport. I did definitely, there's the heavy lifting in the first few sessions on my end, but it's clients where then it's like, we figure it out, we work together. And then sometimes there's people and it's just not a good fit. Right. And that's okay. I know that feels frustrating on the parent side to be like, but I did all the work to find a therapist. It really is a journey. It really is a journey. So yeah, I would kind of look at the people out there and see when you're a parent, what's going for you. But definitely somebody who has experience in that, states that, and can talk about experience working with those kids.
Yeah. I've always said, give your child a choice, like narrow down the people that you think you would like to try, and then show their pictures and talk a little bit about that person to your child and let them decide. Like they might see a picture and go, yeah, I like that guy's face, I want to talk to him. I think that will help, especially as you get older kids, to be more willing to go.
Engage them in the problem solving. There it is. Give them that choice.
Yeah, in the process. Now I know CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. Can you talk about what ABA is?
Applied behavior. So it's going to be an ABA person will typically come into your home, not always, but typically. And it's a very common therapy for autism spectrum, although often I'm recommending it for other diagnoses because the behavior aspect, being able to really work with your student in their space on some very concrete things, it's pretty great. And then cognitive, I'm seeing here to say what they stand for. Cognitive behavior therapy is, again, we're looking at the behaviors through the cognitive approach. So it can be very concrete. It's not always, but sometimes we'll do more, like I know when I'm doing CBT approaches with students, we might have some worksheets that we're working over, making things very visual around like, what is anxiety? What am I experiencing? Being able to match some things or draw some pictures to create other representations for those emotional experiences.
Okay. I have another question. I have a son that is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and ADD in 4th grade, and he is in therapy and OT, but he's very resistant and fights his diagnosis and the help he needs. What strategy can you share for me to get him to embrace and accept the help?
All right. I'm just rereading the question too as well. So I'm sure you have done this, but I would say an ongoing conversation in talking about this. You can also grab some social stories. And I don't have like one book I love. Often I tell parents, ask each other if you have a parent group, or I will go on Amazon. And I have a variety of different ones that I'll use for different clients. So that's why I'm not like, here's the best social story to talk to a 4th grader with a dual diagnosis here. Because, some kids, it's like, they don't like this picture. They do like that one. And so I have found that, again, kind of giving that choice to say like, here's a couple of stories. So social stories can be a great way. And by that, I just mean books that tell a story about another little kid, or person or animal. It doesn't have to be, sometimes it's an animal or a little like goober drawing or something. That's walking through the experience. And also, again, neurodiversity, a pathway to language outside of the labels of diagnosis. So sometimes I will work with a student too of if your son, or I'm not sure if you said son, is frustrated about something about themselves that they're noticing, being able to talk about that, come up with your own language for it, right? Like, I can't think of like a client example off the top of my head, but, if it's like, you can use stuffed animals sometimes to have the conversation. So we externalize it. Sometimes I will do that. I'll just like, and even with the fourth grader, when they kind of know what you're doing, you just kind of roll with it. Like it's no big deal. Do it anyway. So if I'm having a lot of trouble engaging, I might talk to somebody else in the room. Like I've got, I don't know where all my therapy office tools are gone, but I've got this one here. I might just be like, how was your day today? Oh, it really annoyed me when the teacher wouldn't and I might just like engage in a conversation like that. And it's like, my clients always know what I'm doing. It's not, but I mean, that's an example of being kind of creative. And then you can create your own language and your son might talk. So that's one way to be able to kind of circumvent the resistance. And then we can talk about how so-and-so therapist maybe has some good ideas, or really just spend some time listening and asking what, like you can use an emotion chart if that is accessible, what is coming up, where the resistance is kind of focused in. But it's okay. So one thing I tell parents a lot is the brain does not care about the academic timeline or really our social timelines. And so as much as that can be difficult, it really is okay if it takes your students some time to conceptualize their diagnosis and conceptualize that they need supports. I know we want to give them everything we can. Like I felt that pull just as a therapist, and then I had my own kids and it's like times a gazillion. But that idea of neurological empathy, which is just how it sounds, it's just the being empathetic for somebody's neurological state and how it might be different from our own, can really give us space to slow down and walk. Maybe you got to walk along with your kid for a little while. This is frustrating. I don't like I have to do this.
It could be even he doesn't know what to expect from therapy or from any sort of treatment and just needs to see what it looks like. When my son was diagnosed, he was in third grade, and I don't know how I found out about these, but the Joey Pigza books by Jack Gantos, we started reading those, and I was reading them aloud to him because he preferred that I read to him rather than he read to himself. And the pacing in those books really helped me understand how his brain worked, how my son's brain worked, because when the boy in the book was stressed or not taking his medication or wasn't having a good day, the language, the vocabulary was all sped up and jumbled up and ran together, and it was crazy to read it out loud. And that just really helped me understand and put me in a way to understand what he was thinking and feeling with that ADHD lens. And so that just gave me such insight. There's so many good books. In fact, on our Eastside Parents of ADD, ADHD Kids website, I have a list of books that are good for kids with ADHD. There's nothing on there about autism, but there's some really good fiction and nonfiction books on that list to help explain it to kids.
Yeah. And if everyone out there isn't aware, that Parents of ADD, ADHD Facebook group, Nancy, that you just referenced, is exactly what I mean about finding a space where parents can support each other. I love seeing parents answer each other's questions on there. You guys really are each other's experts. It's great. And there are some great stories just like that. I mean, there's tons actually of great social stories like the one you just described, using for students with autism, students with learning disabilities. There's series for anxiety. yeah, like I said, I sort of am hesitant now to give out like my favorites, because there's too many times where I'm like, oh, get this one, it's great. And then I have a client or family who's like, they hated that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you certainly should look through it yourself, because even in the Joey Pigza books, there's talk about divorce, alcoholism. So you want to kind of make sure that you know what it is that you're getting. But yeah, there were a few parts in there I had to skip over, but it just really helped him understand, but also helped me understand and put me in his shoes. Somebody mentioned here, when discussing his diagnoses, maybe talk in terms of how his brain is wired differently rather than it being a disorder. That's what I like about the neurodiverse kind of label, is it doesn't make it sound like it's a negative.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that we're really, if we think about this term coming from the mid-90s, on the one hand, that can seem like a long time ago. On the other hand, it's really not. The pull we have as a society to have a way to talk about things that is a non-shame based, resistant way. It's like, we are diverse. We've always been diverse. We have always had people in our communities who fell a little bit outside of what we would expect in different ways in their neurological, whether it's behaviors, interactions, or, ideas, thinking, all kinds of different things. But we have not always had agreed upon ways to talk about it. And I mean, our kids feel that.
Yeah.
And we feel that as parents, and then they feel it, and,
Yeah, I think something else that helped us too, when my son was young, was to find role models or even famous people who have ADHD and talk about their successes and how they were able to be successful in spite of their ADHD or in spite of any other diagnosis. That there are some really super successful people who are unique in their fields because they have a different way of thinking about things.
Because they're neurologically diverse.
Yeah.
It's great, which is exactly that, where it's like, yes, we need space to talk about where we're tired and we're frustrated or we don't know what to do, but also where your kid brings that smile to your face, and that other people have been doing that for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. We do have, you can now, I mean, it's honestly now it's as simple as Google successful people with, you want to put in ADHD, autism, Tourette's, ODD, learning disabilities or differences. And you're going to get all kinds of people, which is also new in our society experience. I know for myself growing up, that was not a picture I had.
I mean, even right now, Simone Biles.
Yes.
How great she did and how she managed to take care of herself. And she has ADHD.
Yeah. I know. I felt like, I was like, that's like a double epic performance, because not only did she just like crush it in the Olympics on the parts that she did compete, but also to be in that position and share mental health struggles and do what was right for herself. I'm like, yes, gold medal.
Yeah, just for that. Yep.
Because that's brave. I don't know if anybody followed that in the Olympics, but there's an immense amount of pressure to not do that. Right, like just immense, and in terms of like career goals and finances, and just, really was a really wonderful and courageous thing to do.
And normalized it.
Yep. And she wasn't even the only athlete. So
yeah. There's another question I have. My son has always been fidgety and anxious. During the pandemic, he's had a very difficult time focusing on schoolwork. He seems angry most of the time now and spends most of his time playing video games in his room. We're on a waiting list to see a psychologist, but we won't be able to get in for several weeks. Do you have any thoughts about things I can do as a parent to help my son while we're waiting for professional help?
Mhm. So this is a good one, because something that I know I've already mentioned this, but I think is just really important kind of to repeat to ourselves is that COVID really matters right now. Um, Especially last year, the amount of time sort of structured, but often unstructured time in front of a screen. Just, I mean, you could have the best teachers in the world, but it was hard, right? Understatement. It was hard. It was a lot of time in front of the screen. And I will kind of get to, for that parent, I will kind of get to like some things you can do. But I think an important thing to keep in mind first is when we're like, I'm so thankful that we have this ability to talk on Zoom and connect, like so thankful. And it's hard on our brains. There's micro delays, right, of the information and the audio coming through our eyes and into our brains from our own faces out into the other people and then their response time. We're missing huge amounts of information by not being physically in the room with each other. Now, for some students, that was great, right? It's kind of less sensory information. For other students, listening is not their strength, and they were actually receiving tons of useful information by just being present in the room in a classroom setting. And so it's a lot of extra work. And that was hard on our kids, or still is for those that are still in online schooling. And so I think, again, talking to your student about that in the meantime, while you're waiting to be able to sit down with a professional who can help engage in that conversation as well. But just talking about the parts that are hard, talking about the parts that are frustrating. If you're trying to implement the structure around screen time, right? So that they're not feeling like they're always on it, or you're noticing that the extra screen time, even though it's fun, is increasing emotional behavior, anger, resistance. Being able to talk about that, share your own experience right now can be really useful, because kids don't know the way that as adults we know that this has been super hard, but they know it because we're all saying it, if that makes sense. So like they feel it, that everybody's like, ah. But they don't know what to do with it. They don't have this like, well, they're not adults yet, so they don't quite have some of the same mental ways to think about past, present, and future. But also there, it's just a lot of exhausting navigation. So I would say as you're waiting, one of the best things to do would be maybe increase some of those conversations of just talking, or going for a walk, doing something physical. Go for a walk, talk about it, don't talk about it. And then if there's something specific around homework that you're trying to get done, this is kind of like always a good thing, but right now with COVID, and especially if your students are doing kind of a hybrid or any online learning, or just because they have their masks all day and it's COVID, still exhausting, putting parameters on homework time so that they know when it starts and they know when it ends, and really letting them have that break when it ends, I think can be a really valuable piece, again, while you're waiting, because I know everybody's got kind of a wait list right now to get in with therapists and psychologists. Oh, I somehow lost your
Right.
volume. Oh, there it is.
Talking to the teacher about eliminating some of the homework or reducing some of the homework for a while until you're able to get more support.
Yep.
Let's see.
Okay, I just saw in the chat here.
Here's one. We hear a lot about ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. The first slide with the variety of neurodiverse diagnoses was revealing. Are professionals seeing an increase in other neurodiverse diagnoses in kids over the past 18 to 24 months during the pandemic?
So that's an interesting question. One thing that people kind of go back and forth on including in neurodiverse thing like anxiety and depression. I don't have a strong opinion on this. I think that neurodiversity is just defined as it is, and it's the diversity of our neurological makeup. But an important differentiation there is we've absolutely seen a huge increase in anxiety and depression in our kids and our teens, in suicidal thinking and ideation. I've seen increase also in OCD and tics across with clients. Just, I mean, a lot of things that are kind of they can group together for a variety of reasons. The thing to think about there in terms of our umbrella of neurodiversity is often with that term, we are thinking of the actual wiring of the brain through and through versus something that might be triggered by environmental factors such as COVID. And again, I don't find a lot of need to really pull that apart deeply right now, but yeah, to that part of the question, yes, I have seen a lot of increase in diagnosis. Was there a second part that I missed?
No, it was mainly just whether there's an increase in neurodiverse diagnoses. I think what you're saying is bigger increase in things that are affected by COVID, like anxiety, depression, tics, that sort of thing, OCD.
Mm-hmm. And some of the other, so an interesting thing about an increase or not an increase in diagnosis that we're seeing now, and we'll kind of continue to see the fallout of, is there was not an increase in diagnosis for the first however many months, depending on what place you lived in, because we weren't allowed to do it. There was no evaluations being done, no assessments being done. People weren't reaching out and accessing the isolation. We had no new diagnoses. Yeah. And then kind of in the back half, I would say, I think the stress of it has uncovered and probably triggered more diagnoses too. But again, it's really, really dependent on the kid, because I've got especially students who would fall on the spectrum. I got a lot that thrived in online. Mm-hmm. Those parents are not reaching out, right? But then a lot that didn't, because maybe online was great, but then the navigation of it, or the stress of the social stress and anxieties, so it can really go back and forth. I am seeing here in the chat, Nancy, someone wrote, do you have resources to highlight the positive superpowers of neurodiversity? So there are a couple great books just on neurodiversity. These would be adult books, not books I would give your 12-year-old. One is just called Neurodiversity. And there's really good information in there. I don't know if they necessarily use the word superpowers specifically. But then also you can look at so no, I'm not, I know everybody's like, give me actual concrete books. And I'm always a little bit cagey about that, because there's so many resources. Actually, we have a breadth of good resources. But I love, for this one, I actually love hearing other people talk about naming the superpowers of their own neurodiverse students. And there are, like, you can actually put in and search like superpowers of autism, superpowers of ADHD, and you'll get really, really wonderful responses, because it's true. Some of the things that I love are creative approaches to problem solving, perspectives on daily things and more complicated things, but also perspectives kind of on just daily things that have to happen that I never would have thought of before. Joy and enthusiasm over things I wouldn't have thought to be joyful and enthusiastic about, and just bringing like a real genuine enthusiasm over something, whether it is every single detail of buses in our bus system, right? Or it's like the fact that you get to go outside today, or, it can be anything. Yeah, so we just see in the chat the Neurodevelopment Center page on Facebook, and we do have there, Washington State has good, like pretty much a foundation for all of the categories we've talked about today. The LD Association of Washington, and there you will also find each one of those will have good resources specific too for parents that are kind of like thinking about their specific students category.
Like Washington has a good special education PTSA too that does a lot of presentations around various neurodiverse topics that is very helpful. I'm sure other districts do as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Somebody mentioned when you brought up tics, do you think the increase that you've seen mostly stems from the increase in anxiety?
Oh, it's a strong correlation. So I'm going to be a little bit anecdotal here in terms of my experience as a therapist, because we're still kind of in it too. I think I'm very curious to see what the research will show 5 years from now, but in terms of being in it right now, I absolutely am seeing that just with my clients, and then also with the community that families and communities that I'm just a part of and chatting with, that there's an intensity to life and to decision making. That students who are already prone to tics and tic behavior, that it's being triggered more. The reasons can really vary per person, but yeah, correlated with anxiety and just sort of like the social, like there's almost a tangibleness. It ebbs and flows, but there's a little bit of a tangibleness in society right now to people's just like exhaustion.
Yeah, going back to school was a big overdose of people after so many months of not having a lot of that.
Yes, it was, talking with my clients who is, all they wanted is to see their friends.
Yeah.
All they wanted to see their friends. And a lot of people really were able to see their friends this summer, at least outdoors, kind of, again, depending on your community and where you're at, some different variations. But I would say like even my most extroverted clients were like, whoa, the first week of school. And it is, it's a huge amount of feedback.
Yeah.
For our brains.
Lots of stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, the worry about COVID and wearing a mask and staying apart from people, being very aware of all of that changes from day to day. It's
hypervigilance that students didn't, like many things that we have to deal with as a society, they're passed down. So they're modeled and just talked about, kind of through generation. And this is not one of those things, right? It's not like our kids have been hearing us tell the stories. We can't be like, well, when I was fourth grade and had to wear my mask, like there's just none of that. And while like kids never want to like hear our stories, they actually do get quite a bit out of them. So this is again why I said earlier too, like just sitting down and talking with your kids, like that's hard. Mm-hmm. Oh, my nose tickles and I don't know what to do when my nose tickles and I'm in class. Am I allowed to touch my nose or not? Mm-hmm. Or what if I did and then I forgot that I did and now people are looking at me, like
yeah, like you can't cough because everyone thinks you have COVID.
Yeah.
Here's another question. My son was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when he was 4 years old. I have had others say to me to not tell him about the diagnosis as they think he would use this as an excuse not to do his best at school, and he doesn't know anything different. Is it better to not talk about the diagnosis?
Okay, so two things to that question, because I actually hear this a lot. Mm-hmm. One, when you choose to share your diagnosis with your child is, I really think, a personal decision for each family. It really is. It's not, there's not a one right road here. Thematic for neurodiversity, but also really truly. and so I can talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the other thing is the concern that a diagnosis will be used as an excuse. And that's a piece that I will really encourage parents to reflect on, because it's not an excuse. It's a part of who the person is. And in the same way that I wouldn't like somebody who couldn't see the board, who is what would that be if you're in the back of class and you can't see the board, nearsighted, or I'm sorry, I'm mixing it up right now, right? If you needed glasses.
Yeah.
Right. You wouldn't tell your kid like, well, I just want them to sit really close. I don't want them to know, because I don't want them to use it as an excuse not to do their homework. Because that actually wouldn't be helping your kiddo. So I do encourage students at the right, kind of knowing, feeling it out, the right time to have that discussion with your student. But I don't typically encourage not having it or keeping it a secret, because I can tell you 100% of the time, the kid has already figured it out about themselves.
Yep.
Before the parent is ready to tell them. On for all the families I've worked with, where they'll come in and they'll be like, we know we have this diagnosis, but we're not telling them. And this is typically, I think you might have said that question, the person was 4. So 4 is different than 12,
Yeah.
right? 4, I don't know, that's why I say like thinking, I know that you were kind of starting early in the age. So thinking about when that is right. But there will be a point where your student's going to notice. They're going to be aware themselves. And that's usually a good time to talk about it. Again, so we can say, what are the cool things? Let's talk about ways that you learn. Let's talk about creative ways to self-advocate, right? So that we're sending them out with as much bolstering of self-confidence and empowerment of really, truly their awesome design. And not creating like a secretive space. But at 4, you're pretty early. You can feel that out, I think, for when is the right time. But I kind of do encourage reflection on, is it really, is the excuse, really what's happening here? Or is this just what's going on? Because kids will be like, I don't want to do it, but like all kids do that. So
yeah, I agree that they know something's different. And so to help them understand, yeah, you're different, but here's how you're different, and that's okay, is much better than keeping it a secret and making them feel like they should be ashamed of it.
Yeah. Or that their efforts are somehow not somehow not right, or not good. Like I want to say, okay, well, maybe we can't always get the teacher's attention by throwing things, but your brain, and then talking this way to like a younger kid here, but your brain didn't know what else to do because of this. And that's cool. Let's figure out some things that your brain can do that are not throwing.
Yeah. That's so much more positive and encouraging. That's awesome. All right. Well, we have like 2.5 minutes left. So I don't think we have any more questions, but I wanted to say thanks for coming tonight. Thanks so much. It's been great to see you again. And we look forward to having you back at some point. That would be awesome if we could do that.
I am so glad to be here again. I know I kind of, with COVID and everything. And I was just really excited to get to come back and see you again and support you guys here at Parent Chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Coming up, we have more parent chats, obviously. October 13th is the next one. Is it the blues or something else? And then October 27th, your child, their therapist, and you. And then you can see there's a couple of other things going on there as well. We are excited to see what's coming up next. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. And the recording will be out in a day or two, and you can watch us again. Hopefully get some more nuggets of good information. Good night, everybody. Thanks again.